For the next few videos, we're going to go into Windows Forms applications. So you've seen the console application, and that's a plain black screen, and you can't really do much other than read and write to the console. Now, a modern application would use WPF, so it would use this thing here. You wouldn't tend to use Windows Forms applications anymore, they're quite outdated. But for beginners and simplicity, it really is the best place to start, because WPF applications are a lot more coding when it comes to creating the UI, whereas Windows Forms you can just drag and drop and visually see things easier. Now WPF does have tools like that, but again it's a lot more complicated than just a Windows Forms application. So we're going to create a Windows Forms application, but I would not use this once you've learned WPF in future videos. But it's a nice way to get some visual UI, like a window like this we can start creating. We want to cover things like event handlers, so we're going to start by the simplest thing I could think of that was good enough to be interesting and a little bit challenging is a basic calculator. So we've got the calculator like this, 7 times 9 equals, and you can see the result, and you can see what you're typing up here, -5 plus 8, and the results are working out as you're going, times 5 equals this. Now we've got things like pi and all these extra functions and memories, and if you go to the side you've got programmer ones that show different styles. We're not going to go into that depth because it's more about learning the code so much as making the application. In future we might go ahead and create a full calculator. But for now, we just want to make a form with some buttons so you can learn what happens when you click them, and some text entry. So instead of this individual box here and all these numbers and having to click instead of type, I know you can type on the keyboard in the new ones, but still, visually seen just a text box like this to type in what you want. We're going to do that. So let's start by just creating this application first. So go to new project, then templates, Visual Studio C#, Windows Form application, and let's just call this basic calculator, and press enter. And similar to the console application, we right click, open folder. You can see you've got your bin and object folder, which are the temporary ones. You've got the project with the assembly info like before. You can now see you've also got these extra things, resources and settings. Again, because this is only a temporary thing, we're not going to go in depth into Windows Forms applications. I'm not going to bother explaining in depth about these extra files because we're not going to use them. We're going to get into WPF. You've also got this app.config, which you can see over there, your solution and project file, and your code files, and then this is a new type of code file that you haven't seen before. It's a C# file, and then this designer, which is effectively this visual window you're seeing here. So structure wise it's very similar. The app.config you've seen before, and again it just tells you what framework to use. So the only real difference is we've got a settings file, which we're not going to use anyway, and a resources which we're also not going to use. They're very old and outdated, so just ignore these two additions, you don't need to know about them. And now this one new addition here, which we'll go into in a second. Let's take a look at the program. You can see again it's very similar to a console, except now we've got this thing STA thread, which I believe stands for single threaded application. Again, it's single threaded apartment. There we go. It's been a long while since I've done Windows Forms. I wouldn't worry too much again about all this. Just think of this as the main where the program comes into, just like the console application. And instead of doing like console.readline and blah blah blah, instead we run this application, which then runs this form. And then this call to application.run doesn't return until the form here has been closed with the the X button at the top. So very similar to a console application. It will come into here and it will run to here and then it will close. But the difference is now, instead of a console application appearing and closing, we spin up this new form. Again, don't worry about these two, they're not going to be used when you come to WPF. So let's just take a look at what this looks like first. Let's press F5. And you can see there's our nice little form already. So we've got a form with the name Form 1. We've got the little buttons that expand and minimize and close. And then you see when I've closed the form, the application stopped running. Let's just make this text a little larger. So you can also put a breakpoint by just clicking on the right hand side and pressing F5 to run again. And you'll see it steps into here. Press F10. F10, and when you hit F10 here, it's going to spin up the form, and it hasn't come back yet. As soon as we close, it then comes out of here. So that's the real basic quick overview of the program, where it starts and how it runs. So now let's go into this Windows form. You can see you can expand here, and you can see the CS file and also the designer file. Now this designer file is auto-generated. And you can see it says Windows Forms Designer Generated Code. So this is code, and you don't need to visually use this. You can completely construct in here, which is just not recommended because this file, like I say, is auto-generated. But just ignore this designer file for the most part. But you can have a browse and see what's going on in there as you're creating things and see what's happening and see how it's done. But in general, you just look at this CS file. This is your main code file for the form. You'll notice double clicking actually opens this visual designer as well. So there's a few things you can do to get to the code behind class, the actual, the code of the form. You can either right click over here and view code, and that will open up this form. You can be in this visual designer and just press F7, and that'll take you to it as well. So let's start with this form. Let's just drag it larger. So click the handle here, drag it larger. Let's press F5, and let's see that that's visually gone larger. You can see the difference. And now let's change this title. So if you just click, you can see this white dots around the form here. That's the selected object. So right now the only thing in our form is the form itself. So we've got the form selected. You can see down the bottom right, the properties. You can see Form 1 here. And there's a drop down for every part of the form. And right now there's only the form. So with Form 1 selected, you go to the Properties window, and you can see here Text and Form 1. And that means this title at the top of the form. So let's just click here and type Basic Calculator and press Enter. And you can see up here now, the name's changed. So that's the start. We've got the tile. So now we want to create some buttons to do things. So as I mentioned, if we spin up the original calculator, we're not going to bother with all these buttons. Well, to be honest, we can. We might do. Yeah, let's do these. But you won't need them because instead of this box here that you can't click in, we're going to have an actual text box you can type in and change values to. And then, press enter or click equals to get the result. So let's make the... we'll make this section, in fact it'll be this whole section here, this grey section. So let's just copy this section, as well as adding a text box at the top. So let's start with a text box. So to add that, click Toolbox. Let's just pin this because we're going to be using it for a while. All Windows Forms, and we get everything. And these are all the visual components you can use. So you want a text box, click and drag, and let go. And you can see we've got a little text box here. And then you hover to the right and you can change the size. So let's make it nice and large. And then if we run that, we press F5. So you can see we've got a little text box and we can type away. What you'll notice is if we change the size of the form, then this text box doesn't resize. So let's fix that quickly. And they are with anchor points. So if you click, you notice the ant trail, the little grey dots all around the box, that's what you've got selected. So when you select the main form, it's around the form. When you select the text box, it goes around the text box. Also in the bottom right, it changes from the form 1 to the text box 1. Now also this name, this text box 1 and this form 1, is the name that you access this text box with in your code. So when we come to get this information or want to show it or do anything with it, we access this text box with this name. And if you go to the properties and you scroll down, you can see here name with parentheses around. So similar to variables, let's give this a new name. So let's call this user input text and press enter. So it's a little bit more descriptive. Now, thinking on this, we also need a result. So we're going to add a label. Oh, sorry, let's first do this anchor point I was talking about. So you can see here anchor in the layout, and it's anchored to the top left. So it means the top and the left are going to stay based on the relative position of the parent, which is the form. So we also add this right by clicking here, and now you can even do it visually in the designer. You can see the size is changing with the form, and that's what we want. Let's also make a label now for the result. So when you've worked out a calculation, you want to see what the result was. So find a label here, drag and drop, click and drag, and you can see it sort of snaps to these blue lines. These are sort of auto-aligning based on some default sizes. And you can see also this label you can't resize by default. There's no drag, and that's because a label by default has, I believe it's an auto size. Again, I haven't done this in years, so you'll have to bear with me. Let's see if we can find it. There we go, auto size. So let's change this to false. And now you can see we've got the dots all around. So we can now click and drag, and let's resize this to the edge. And let's also anchor it the same as the text box. The label we want to call calculation result text. And for the default value, instead of saying label 1 here, let's put please enter an equation and press enter or equals. So now we've got this will be changed to the actual result when we've entered something. So now we've got effectively this top bar. Now we need all these buttons, and these are all going to be buttons because they're that's what they do. You click them and they're going to do something. So we need 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we need 4 by 5. Now you can do, I believe, tables, a table layout panel. And there we go. And we click and drag. And let's position to the edges. Let's anchor this. We'll also anchor this to the bottom. So as well as the right, we'll do the bottom. And what that means is when we expand downwards, this table will now fill up all the remaining bottom. Now we need 4 across, 5 down. So click this little arrow at the top right. Add column. Add column, that's 4 columns. Add rows, we've got 2, 3, 4, 4, 5. And now I've got to remember how you do anything with these columns. It's been that long. Edit rows and columns, there we go. So columns, we've got 50%, 50%. Now you can do, I believe if we do auto size on all of them, they're going to equally size, is my guess. Let's see if that's true. Not so much. Okay, so we've got 4. Let's do a percentage of 25. So there we go. We've got 4 columns. And now let's do the rows as well. So edit rows, and then we've got 5, so we want 20% for these. Again, don't worry too much about remembering or understanding how to do these. This is a one-time use. This is just a quick way to get some UI. When you come to do some UI for real projects, you will use WPF, and then we'll go a lot more into detail about how all the UI is constructed. This is just really to get you going to, visually create this and do more on learning the event handlers and things like that, not so much learning this UI. So we now got this grid ready to accept the buttons. So let's label this table first. So you can see it's selected here, and we've got table layout panel 1. So let's just call this something like button panel. So buttons panel, that'll do. And this is all just so when you're in code, you don't see all these random names. It's more descriptive. So it always helps to name everything. So let's click button in the toolbar, drag and drop, and you can see we dropped it inside of the first row and the first column. And by default, a button is a draggable size, which we don't want. We want this to really fill this space. So for that, I believe there's something called a dock, if I'm not mistaken. I better arrange this alphabetically instead. There we go, dock. So I think we can do a dock fill by clicking the center. And there we go, this is now filled that whole area. And it's called button 1, which is the name at the top. So let's call this, let's take a look at this calculator, CE button. So CE button, and then the text inside we want to say CE. You can see we've got CE. Let's press F5 to run and visualize this, and you can see that for one, the label's slightly too high because we've gone over the bottom of the text box. But you can see this is a button. This is a clickable button, and it's also a quarter the width of the screen because everything resizes. And you can see when we get to a certain size, like I'd say here, things are going to be too small to fit. So visually, you can place it next to it and see that the minimum size we probably want the calculator to be is here. So let's try and remember that position there, and then go into here and sort of, we can't change it while it's running, click stop. And let's drag it to, I'd say about here. And you can see that's also off. So we want to, I'd say there's about the smallest we want to allow this window to go. So you can see the size here, 506 by 522. Let's change that to 500 by 520. And that's still fine. So let's now use this as like a minimum size. So with the form 1 selected, again, I think there we go, minimum size. Let's type 500, 520. And then let's drag this back out. If I could actually drag it out, why can't I drag it out? Oh, I've entered maximum size, that's why. Try to put it in the right place, minimum size. Now let's drag this back out. Let's fix this label, so let's just move it down. You can use the arrow keys, so I'm pressing down on the arrow key, and you can see it's moved down out the way. And then let's just resize that just underneath. Press F5 again. And I still see it's overlapping. Okay, let's move down quite a bit, and let's check it's actually moving. There we go. So we're finally out of the way. And this is to do with, this is a high resolution screen, and you can see how the text is slightly blurry. That's Windows 10 attempting to auto scale up a non-scalable form, so an old Windows form. So the positioning isn't exactly as you see it in the designer. But again, ignore that for now. It's not about Windows Forms so much about just getting this thing built so we can start doing some functions with it. So now you've made this one button, and you can just basically do exactly the same for the rest of all of these buttons. And you want to give them a name of the title, so what they're doing, so CEC. Then we'll have, we don't really need this one, but we might as well put it in, and we'll just call that back. That's to delete a character, so as you're typing, it deletes one of the things you've typed. And then divide, times, minus, plus, equals. We can call that dot or period, and call that sign or plus or minus. That basically toggles between whether the values are plus or a minus. Again, that's not so much useful in ours because we're going to be typing. So in fact, let's leave that one out and leave it as a blank. And all the others are numbers. So just give them names. And I'll whiz through this. I'll just fast forward the video so you don't have to watch me doing this But in essence, you click the button, you drag, you drop, you go over to the right side, properties, you change the dock to fill, you change the text to the visible text of the button, and then you change the name to a descriptive name. And then go ahead and repeat this for every button. So you can see how I'm really quickly adding these. All I've done is clicked on one button, press Control C, then I click inside the cell of the table and press Control V to paste, and click again and paste. So this is a quick way to get the buttons in. I'll then go back and change all the names. So there you can see we've got all the buttons added. And we drop down this box, you can see all the names: C button, CE, DAL for delete or back, whichever you want, divide, dot or period, 8 equals, oops, there's a mistake, equals wants to be equals button. 5 button, that's the form, 4 button, minus, 9, 1, plus, 7, 6, 3 times or multiply, 2, user input, and 0. So everything's been labeled and named and created. So let's press F5 and take a look. So here's our little basic calculator with the buttons that we can click to do things, the text telling us what to do, and the box where we're going to actually enter our equation to work out. And then you can expand and go down to the minimum size, and it's still in fact that's a nice size to start at. Let's resize our form to the smallest size. There we go. Now, when you run this program, you'll be expected to, let's say we did 4 plus 5, you would expect to press enter and to get, the result. That would be a natural response that you'd expect. Got a little bit of a spacing going on here. Let me just see if that changes with the minimum size. Huh. Yeah, so when you make it minimum, you get a weird spacing, so let's just leave it at that size for now. Yeah, so say you type 4 plus 5 and you press enter, you'd expect that to give you your result. So to correct that, it's going to be the same thing as when you press the equals button. That's going to be the thing that does the calculation. And you can see here the IntelliTrace is sort of given us some visual output of what we're doing, which is quite cool. So let's first make this equals a default button, which means when the form's focused and you press enter, it should press that button. So if we click this equals button, and then we scroll down, I believe it's it's the form, I believe. You click the form, and you scroll down, and you should you've got a cancel button. Just remembering what it's called. Is it accept button? Yeah, there we go. So accept button, like the default button if you're when you press the enter. I believe the cancel button is when you press the escape. So we could also link the CE, which would just clear the current text. Which again, in our program, the C really is the same as CE because we're doing the whole calculation in one. It's not like we've got an ongoing calculation. So saying that, let's delete the C. So let's select the form, and let's change this accept button to be our equals button. Now you can see it's gone blue, which is like a sign that it's a default button. So let's first see if this works with having a text box. Test, and then you can see now when we've pressed enter, for 1 over here it showed that we've pressed enter, and 2 we don't get that annoying Windows beep. So we now know it's effectively pressing this button when we press enter, which is what we want. Obviously we don't do anything yet, so you can't really see anything visual. And then also we want this CE to be pressed when we press escape. So escape, now we just get the beepy noise. So let's close, select the form, go to the properties, and the cancel button, change that to the CE button. Run the program with F5, type some text, press escape. And you can see the over here it's saying we press CE, and we also don't get that annoying beep. So now when we press escape, we're effectively clicking this. When we press enter, we're effectively clicking the equals. So now when we link actions into these, they will, be useful. So let's start by creating an event handler. So now we've got the form visually made, we want to actually do things. So the simplest thing to do is this CE button, which will just clear this text box, so it will get rid of any input. So there's multiple ways you can add event handlers, but an event handler is something that responds to an event. It handles the event, hence the name. So the event being, you've clicked this button, and then the handler being effectively a function, a method, just a special type of method. So you can see down at the properties, you've got this events arrow, or lightning bolt. You click this, and you can see a load of events that are specific to a Windows Forms button, and you can action any of these events. So visible changed, tab index changed, size changed, all these are events. The default event for a button is a click, and you can see this drop down here. This is a drop down of all functions that it can find inside this Forms code in order to do something when you click the button. So a really quick way of doing this is you can just double click this button, or you can double click inside the click event here. So let's just double click here, and you can see it's basically jumped into the code behind of the class. So if we went back to the class and pressed F7, it's jumped to the code behind, which is just this file, this form1.cs, and you can see there form1.cs, and it's then created this private function for us. Its private function returns nothing. It's called CE button underscore click, and it's got two parameters. One's an object, so it can be anything, a sender, and the second is event args, which is for handling the event that happened, some information about the click event in this case. And then this is now the function that will run when we click the button. So let's just make a message box pop up. So if you type messagebox.show, and you just do hi, press F5 to run, and when we click the C button, our code now runs, and you can see this hi box. There's no title, we just literally passed a string just to show that something was happening. We should also be able to test that if we press escape on the keyboard, we get the same thing. So this function's now being run. We've linked in this button click to this function. So how did that happen? We double clicked here to add this, and it automatically did it for us. So let's just delete this from the list here, and now that's gone away, nothing will happen. You can see in the drop down, it's automatically found that this is a function in the forms class that's able to accept a click. It's the same type that the click expects, so it can assign it. So let's reassign it, and let's just take a look at what that does and what that means when this happens, and then we'll do it manually. So I mentioned this designer class here, which is auto-generated. So if you open this file, you can already see it's added all these private variables, and these are all the things we drag and dropped onto the visual designer. So there's all the buttons we added. There's the label, the input text, the table layout panel. So it's created private variables. And then if we go into this region, you can see initialize component, which if we go to the form1.cs class, you can see the constructor, when it's created, calls initialize component. And that function is inside this auto-generated class. So when form1 is created in the program here, when we do new form, this first goes into the constructor, which then calls initialize, which goes into here, which then effectively instantates all of these variables. So we create instances of the text boxes, the labels, the buttons, and then remember, this is all auto-generated code. This is what Visual Studio has done for us when we visually created the form. It's then taken the buttons panel, which is the panel where all the buttons are, and suspended layout, so that the window doesn't keep redrawing itself as it's being created. Then it suspends the whole forms layout as well. So these two things just stop the form from drawing. Then it goes ahead and creates all the properties and positions everything to the exact place that we visually designed, and it does the anchor points and all. You can flick through this yourself and see. Again, I won't go through explaining this because you won't need to use Windows Forms. You'll be doing WPF, but it's nice to see where everything is and what's happening if you're interested. So let's go to the C button here, and you can see now here the single line C button.click, and if you hover over, or better yet, if we just delete and press dot and type click, you can see it's a lightning bolt, which means it's an event. And, well, it's an event handler in this case. And you can see it occurs when the controller's clicked. And the way you work with event handlers, you don't assign them directly. You can, but you don't usually. You do a plus equals, which if you recall when you were adding values together, it means that click equals click plus this event handler. So you're combining two event handlers into one. And this works because, you know, event handlers are a special thing. They can be, there's a single property, if you will. If we press F12 on click, you can see the type of property. It's a public, so we can access it. And then it's got this additional thing, an event, before the variable type. So the type's an event handler, which if we press F12 on that, you can also see is this thing called a delegate, which we'll get into in future videos. But in essence, it's a function that has two properties, an object and an event args, which you'll remember is in our function CE click, CE button click. So what happens is when a property or a variable is of type event, you can use this syntax of plus equals, and basically it means you could just say multiple functions can run when this button's clicked. So if we added an extra function, if we go into the form really quick and just copy and paste this function, give it another name, click 1, high 1. We go back into the code, we copy and paste, and we do click plus equals this function, click plus equals this function. So now this is added two functions to the single event of click. If we press F5 to run, and we click this button, let's see, we get high, we click OK, then we get high 1. You can do this entire thing yourself in code if you want to instead. So if we deleted that line from the auto-generated file, and we ran the code, you can see now nothing happens. And then inside of our constructor, this is our normal class, not the auto-generated class, we can just go after the initialized components and put that code ourselves. And then if we run, we'll now get the message box appearing. So you can hook in the events yourself if you don't want to use the visual designer. But to be honest, there's no real reason. It's just nice to see how it's constructed. That when you open this and you double click this DAL, it's created the function for us. Then in the designer, it's added this click event handler. So it just does that for us. It saves us some work, so that's fine. And the CE, you can see the CE doesn't have it here because this properties pane is populated based on this auto-generated file. It doesn't take into account what we do in our own code file. So because we added it after here, it's not recognized in the designer. So let's just delete our code and let's let the designer do it automatically for us. So click CE. It already exists. Let's just click the drop down and select CE. So now to add event handlers, so functions that will run when we click these buttons, all we have to do is go through and double click each button, and you can see we get the function. And there we go. There's all the functions ready to do things with. So before we go, let's start organizing this class again. Let's add the XML comment 3 forward slashes, and basic calculator. I'm going to be a little bit lazy on the comment descriptions. You know how to do comments now, and when it comes to your application you can make these a lot more descriptive. I'll make them descriptive enough that they're useful, but you know, we're not going to go super descriptive because it will just waste time on the videos. This is the constructor, so we want a region with hash region, and let's call it constructor. Let's go to the end, put an end region there because this is the start and finish of the constructor. Give the constructor a comment as well because it's a public function. Anything public should really have the exportable comments, the 3 forward slashes. And then we'll just say default constructor. Collapse that to get it out of the way. And now these are a load of functions, so we could group these all into one big region just called public functions, but let's be a little bit more definitive. So we have, I'd say, the plus, the minus, the times, the divide, the operators. So let's group those. So there's the divide, start the region here. Operator functions, divide, times, minus, plus, and equals is, you know, really part of that. End region, and there's the operator functions. We'll comment these functions as we go. Now you've got the dot. I'd class that as part of the numbers. Dot 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. These are all the numbers. So let's call it number functions. Or sorry, methods is what we, not functions. Remember, when I talk about functions as in these things, I say the word function because that's just how they've been for so long, but technically termed that we call them methods because, again, when we get further down the line you'll see something called a function, which is basically here, a func as they call it, shortcut. Encapsulates a method that has no parameters. So because, you know, if we called this a function, then the definition of a func or a function here wouldn't make sense. So we call it a method. So we've got number methods, and then they finish here. And then finally we have the delete and the CE. So let's call these clearing methods. So we're keeping the class nice and organized. So we're going to work our way through these functions, and I'm going to split this video up to keep it nice and short. So right now we've made a class, we've made a Windows form project. We've got a form that we've visually chucked a load of buttons and text and labels on. We've ran the form and assigned the enter to the equals press and the escape to the CE, which now runs a function so you can see something happening. In the very next video we're going to start adding these functions one by one and creating the actual function of the calculator. So really all you've learned here is a very quick overview of constructing a UI. So we haven't really gone into depth about how we've done that, again, because we will be learning WPF. But if you've watched the video, it really is as simple as opening the toolbox, dragging and dropping components on, and then taking a look at the properties, which we go back to here, and just having a play. It's sort of self-explanatory. Just by trial and error and playing with things, you really can figure out the Windows forms. And then we've looked at events, so actually how to do things here. So in this case we just double click CE, and once there's already a function on the button, if you double click it'll just jump you straight to that function as like a nice shortcut. So if you want to go, when I press 9 I want to do something, double click, it'll jump you to the function. So a nice little shortcut. And then we've had a quick look at the designer, the auto-generated file, to show you what's going on and how those functions and events were added and how the whole form came together. In the next video, like I say, we're going to go over adding functions to these buttons, parsing the input, clearing the output, all things like that. So stay tuned.